so who can tell me what story we are studying in the Bible right now? Whose life are we studying?
Joseph.
We're studying the story of Joseph. And so we've looked at his overall story. And last week, what did Caitlin talk about? Does anyone remember? It starts with an E. Entitlement. Caitlin talked about entitlement. She talked about how Joseph's brothers may have been entitled and looked disfavorably upon their brother. And today our topic is going to be the idea of forgiveness. And it's kind of something that we talked about the first time when we talked about a story. You can barely read it at the bottom, but I promise you we are going to talk about forgiveness. But before we jump in to our idea of forgiveness, I want to do like a poll of everybody who's in here. Have you ever been watching a TV talk show?
Yeah.
And they take a poll of everybody who's in there. I kind of want to gauge kind of where we are as an audience today. So I'm just going to ask a couple of questions, and you just, if you identify with the question, then raise your hand. Really simple. So the first question is, raise your hand if you've ever had someone do something wrong to you. It looks unanimous back there, except for Taz, who didn't raise his hand. But I think he's had something wrong done to him. So that's the first question. We've all had something wrong done to us. Second question: raise your hand if you've ever wanted revenge on somebody.
Oh my Carol!
Yeah, we've probably all wanted revenge on somebody at some point. Next, raise your hand if you've ever held a grudge against somebody.
What's that?
Somebody's wronged you and you kind of just held on to it and you're like, I'm going to get you back.
Somebody kill my hamster.
Yeah.
What?
Up next, now raise your hand if you have ever done something wrong to someone else.
Oh, never.
Once again, unanimous, right?
Yes, you have.
And lastly, raise your hand if you've ever gone up to someone and asked them for their forgiveness.
Parker.
I don't know, that may be a little bit less of us.
Well, actually.
So what we learned from this is that if there's one thing that's true about us as a group of people right here, and I would argue everybody else in the world, is the fact that every single one of us have been wronged at some point. Every single one of us have wanted to get revenge or hold a grudge on someone. We've all actually physically wronged someone ourselves, and the majority of us maybe haven't really gone and asked someone sincerely for forgiveness. And so just hold on to that thought. We have proof behind the point that I'm going to make later on. But right now, I want to recap the story of Joseph just really quick and how forgiveness ties into it. So Joseph was born into the family of Jacob. He's one of 12 sons. He is the favorite of his dad. He gets sold into slavery by his brothers because his brothers are jealous of him. A whole bunch of stuff happens. He rises up and he's second in command of a guy named Potiphar's house in Egypt. And then he gets accused of some stuff and he's thrown back in jail. And then he gets out of jail and he talks to the Pharaoh of Egypt. And then the Pharaoh really likes him, and so he raises him up to second in command of entire Egypt. And then, as the story would go, there's a famine in the land. Egypt has food. And here's Joseph just hanging out in Egypt, second in command, and his brothers show up. And they think he's dead. And it all goes down. The brothers find out it's Joseph. Joseph recognizes his brothers. The brothers are shaking in their boots. And they're like, oh man, he's finally going to get us. It's been so many years. We thought he was dead. We sold him into slavery. He's going to get his revenge on us. So what does Joseph do? He says, no, brothers. This was God's plan. He brought me here for a reason. I forgive you. The whole family, come live with me in Egypt. And then happily ever after, right? And so that's the story of Joseph. The very end part, that forgiveness part, is kind of like the plot twist, where if you were watching the movie in the movie theater, you probably would have seen some big battle where Joseph would have gone taken out all of his brothers and revenge would have been had, and we would have been like, yeah, vengeance is his, and we were really happy. But no, the plot twist is Joseph forgave his brothers. He did the unexpected. And so that's not only just an example for us to follow, but it's also pointing to something that's so much greater. But I want to take the time to pull this back to us personally. And so we already asked some questions. And what I want you to do is take some time seriously and think as I have this duct tape stuck to my shoe. You all said that someone has wronged you at some point in your life. And so what I want you to do right now is stop and think about one specific instance in your life where somebody has done something wrong to you. They've hurt you. They've said something about you. They've done something to something you own. Just stop. Don't say it out loud, but think about that moment in your life. And think about how you felt. What were your emotions in that time when somebody had wronged you? Is anybody willing to share what they were feeling when they had that happen to them?
Anger.
You were feeling angry. It's a valid emotion.
Disappointed.
Disappointed in them that they would treat you that way.
Betrayed.
Betrayed. True.
Hate.
Hate. Very strong words. Maybe you felt bitter towards someone. Maybe you felt wrath. Like you wanted to take your wrath out on somebody. Maybe if you had a really good vocabulary, you would feel malice. Does anyone know what malice means? It means like having an evil, like wishing evil upon someone. Like something bad happened to me, so I'm like, man, I wish a house would fall on you or just something crazy like that would happen. And why do we feel that way? Why do we feel that way when somebody wrongs us? Why do we get all these negative feelings welling up inside of us? Jackson, why do you think we feel that way?
Because we feel that that what they've done to us isn't fair to us, or
Yeah. It's not fair, right?
Yeah.
What we were doing was right. What they did to us was wrong. And we want justice, right? We want people to get what they deserve. We want people to be punished for what they've done. That's why we get angry, because there's some sort of injustice in our personal life. We get angry. We have that bitterness welling up inside of us. We may start holding a grudge against someone because we feel like they've done something that's unfair to us. And I'm here to say, I don't think that's a bad feeling to feel, because that's just the way our nature is. We know the difference between right and wrong, and when somebody does something wrong to us, it's okay to feel angry. But what I want to put in front of you is the fact that it's not okay to hold on to that and make it a lifestyle. It's not okay to find your identity in that anger or in that bitterness. And so we looked at kind of like how that played out in Joseph's life. What does the Bible maybe say about that? And so you may have noticed that I have said a couple of words. I actually pulled them straight from a single verse in Scripture in Ephesians 4. And I'm just going to read it to you. It says, "Let all bitterness and wrath and anger and clamor and slander be put away from you, along with all malice. Be kind to one another, tender-hearted, forgiving one another, as God in Christ forgave you." And so this is Paul writing to the church in Ephesus, and he's saying, all that bitterness and anger and that emotion that you feel when there's just like stress between two people and you've been wronged, he's saying, put that aside and forgive. Forgive one another, just as God in Christ forgave you. So he's kind of making a basis for the argument. He's not just saying, hey, just do it because you're supposed to. He's saying, do it because someone has set an example for you. Because you have been forgiven, you're supposed to go and forgive. Not hold on to that. So think back to Joseph. Think back to Joseph. Think at the time when he was thrown into the pit and sold into slavery by his brothers. And then think about the time when he finally forgave his brothers. Does anyone know exactly how long it was between those 2 points?
10 years.
Close. It was 13 years. 13 years from the point Joseph was sold into slavery to the point where his brothers came back and he forgave them. Now, 13 years is longer than some of y'all in this room have even been alive. So can you imagine having that on you for 13 years? Your brothers, your own flesh and blood, turned their back on you and just basically sold you for dead? Now, 13 years is a long time to deal with something. I mean, some of our minds can't even imagine it because, like I said, we've only been alive for that long. But did Joseph forgive his brothers at the moment he saw them, or did he choose to forgive his brothers before that moment? I would argue that Joseph didn't just make a split-second decision to forgive them at the time. He's like, oh yeah, y'all are my bros, I forgive you, it's okay. That's not what happened. I think that Joseph set his mind and he chose to live a lifestyle of forgiveness, not a life of holding on to a grudge. Now, a wise man once said, I don't know who the exact person who said this is, but they said that holding on to a grudge is like drinking poison and hoping that the other person dies. It's silly, isn't it? But yet we do it so very often. We hold on to our emotions, our anger and our wrath and our bitterness, and we just store it up inside of us and we wish evil upon other people. But in reality, that's not doing anything but tearing us up from the inside, right? We've all kind of experienced that. We know what that feels like. But Joseph, he chose to forgive his brothers long in advance. And because of that, he was able to live a life of faithfulness to God. He was not distracted by the anger and bitterness and all the things that had welled up inside of him for all that time. He let it go and he lived. And what happened? Great things happened after that because his brothers came back and were reconciled.